Hi, my name's Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So thank you for joining me this 14th of May 2023, when I will be discussing shortly the subject of ego out. So high space case, the proxy XY, creating awareness, Tony Gibboni, Stuart N, Artifact Dan Moretti, D2105K. Thank you for joining me this evening. And hi, Cosmic Dave. So you might ask yourself, what are you looking at there on this screen? And I'm going to tell you. Hi, Louis Navarro. Hi, Starfish Troopers. And glad to have you here. So this is one of the many interesting artifacts, crosshatch, that I took images of in the National Museum of Finland on the way back from Japan. I had a little bit of a long layover by design and went in there. And this is about 1,100 years old. It's a brass buckle. And you might like to think of this as potentially the only remaining attire of a human that lived way before us. I particularly like this belt buckle because of its features. It's actually mirrored. I mirrored it horizontally to look like the Western sort of sign out, like it's an arrow pointing out, but actually it was the other way round as it was mounted. So it's mirrored horizontally, and with it being mirrored horizontally, you had the it appears on the left, but actually it's on the right if it's correctly represented. And so you have your vortex structure here, and above, around the third eye, with the overall kind of pretzel shape, the heart shape over here. And then you have your caduceus spiral going through the disruption zone and out, much like we saw on the Evo contacting the silicon dioxide in Henk Uren's Vega experiment. And of course, down here we have a squished, in my view, Maltese cross. Of course, it could just be a cross. Just could be a decorative design. This could just be a decorative design. But when I come to have the opportunity to show you the other objects that were close by to this in the museum, I think you will very readily discount that. You will think that really, probably, this is demonstration more of an understanding of technology rather than just a decorative design. On what is the right side, but here, as you can see, the left, you can see that this one is above this one, and that is what we normally get in these situations. One is slightly above the other. Okay. So what do I mean by ego out? What is ego out? Well, the definition of ego out is the quantity of information, knowledge and wisdom lost by the death of an individual. And the origins of this phrase, ego out, is Peter Gluck of Cluj, Romania. And the experience of the last couple of weeks, and actually of the last few years, in fact, has made me think a lot about this phrase. I used to converse quite regularly with Peter Gluck of Cluj in Romania. In fact, I was considering visiting him at one point and tried to make that happen. Sadly, that's never going to happen. And I was reminded of this particular phrase when I first went to Actually, the second time I went to Russia to speak at the Russian cold fusion, or rather cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning conference in 2018. And the reason was that Yuri Bazhatov, this absolute lovable, incredible scientist, the guy that came up with Erzions, which Shishkin say is just another form of charge clusters. He led the Russian cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning conference meetings for the best part of a quarter of a century. In fact, over a quarter of a century. And he suddenly came down with a condition, having done a lot of water surface discharge experiments, actually really rather similar to those of Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, but rather than running very short experiments, these were quite long experiments. And there was actually pretty much blind panic. And I have this video, which I will share at another time, with the translation, with like Dubovik telling people how serious they need to be considering, how this kind of like, it sucks the life force out of you, and so on. They're all like in a panic as to what killed Yuri. But I think the point here is that Yuri was a leader, had immense understanding of the field, of the experiments in the field, and basically there was a huge amount of knowledge and wisdom that was lost by his death, by the death of Yuri Bazhatov. And you can see his CV here by David Nagal, who was head of the LENR research and condensed matter nuclear science research for the US Navy for a very long period of time, a very huge figure in the field as well. Leading Russian cold fusion transmutation researcher and advocate has died. Dr. Yuri Bazhatov, who passed away on March the 9th, 2018 at the age of 70, so relatively young, I'd say, was an active member of and leader in the LENR community until the end. He received his doctorate from Lomonosov Moscow State University in 1984, and he did that after working at the university's Scientific Research Institute of Nuclear Physics on cosmic rays since 1974. And this was where he began to develop the theory of the new hadron, which he later called an Erzion. Anyway, you can go and read this link in your own time. I will include these in the blog at remoteview.icu, because I'm going to launch a Zoom chat and for open discussion on what's happened over the last few days and how best we can use it to move forward. But I've got some really exciting news. So there's lots there. So this is on Infinite Energy, which has been a great place that's shared media from our field over the many years. And I think one of the people that set that up was Arthur C. Clarke. And Arthur C. Clarke was actually a friend of Peter Gluck, who actually contributed greatly to the field of cold fusion. This is the progenitor of the phrase ego out. And he died in 2021. He had lost a lot of his faculties before then, and that is lamented, and I will show that in the latter stages of his blog. But it says here, we recently learned that our friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Gluck, passed away on March the 23rd, 2021, at the age of 83. Now, given that he contributed so much to the cold fusion field, it is quite fitting that the day he left this earthly realm was the anniversary date of Pons and Fleischmann's cold fusion announcement of March 23rd, 1989. That's timing. In addition to writing numerous articles for Infinite Energy, Dr. Gluck served on our scientific advisory board from 1995. He was a catalytic chemist, old school, built huge plants, and so forth. And I really appreciated all of the conversations I had with Dr. Gluck, and I kind of miss his perspective in the field and his perspective from sort of 2010 or whatever, he shared on his blog, Ego Out, which you can go and read. But here, he has a kind of more in-depth, this is his blog, you can see from 2010 all the way through to his passing year. He has this little extension of what Ego Out is here. Ego Out is a special form of knowledge management. The idea was inspired by Gertine knowledge quote of the day, of today. Okay, so it says Ego Out as defined in the place Ego Out here, which is his definition, is actually a special form of personal knowledge management. It is about purified, condensed and enhanced knowledge, including wisdom, to be carefully defined, and prediction, the highest function of human thinking. I hope that the KM specialists will take notice and will develop the concept that has its merits. So, not entirely sure what he means by KM. Anyway, Ego Out as also belongs to the field of positive psychology. The action of reducing the loss of intellectual values caused by the unavoidable death is a form of joy, of giving back to life more than you have received from it, to die generously. And I have to say, I can tell you, there's no greater truth than what I've just read there. To have had insights, right or wrong, and to try have educated those out so that they may have some positive benefit, some effect on other people's psychology that has a net positive result, gives me immense joy. And I hope I've conveyed that over these past 5 years by constantly repeating how honoured I feel to be part of this community, to have had so many people share their understanding such that they can with me, and for me to have been able to have so much engagement from the community, and be able to at least put a few lines between some dots and share those. It gives me immense joy. Immense joy. It's, as I've said to many people, it's one of the most rewarding things you can possibly do. Moving on. He says, Ego Out is a special form of creativity, and its contribution to a better world is linked to the immense power of diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, let as few as possible of your mental songs remain unsung. Think, remember, and tell us what you have learned. And it's interesting because it was at the presentation on October the 4th, 2018, in the year of Jiří Bažatov's death, that I shared the presentation Seek and Share. I shared the first third of O-Day material, which was largely material that had come from and been inspired by initially the analysis of the Lion reactors. The Lion reactors. If Lion had not shared his reactors, I don't think that process would have started. I just don't think it would have. No. As I said in my last blog on the subject, and there will be more, I need to catch up, but the very first video, how should we put this? The very first document that I saw coming out of the lockup in West London recently was a document talking about this new chamber or passageway with the first piece of metal found inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And it was only at that point that I realized that potentially Lion had a far greater interest than he had ever let on. In fact, I really didn't know that he had any interest at all in the Great Pyramid of Egypt. But then it became very clear when other books were coming out, like the Giza Power Plant and other stuff, that he had a very long-standing interest in the pyramid, Great Pyramid. And I just thought, well, this is the first document I'm going to see. Let's see if there's going to be something else that kind of like is a bit of a revelation for me. So there was a pile, and I guess it was about 20 inches of documents. And I literally put my hand down halfway into it and lifted it out, like splitting a deck of cards. And there was an email. Actually, it was a comment by me on a forum. In fact, I believe it was ECAT World, but he had printed it out. And it was me absolutely staunchly defending the right of me 356, who has now revealed his name as Thomas Jedznik, this Czech guy who we did some experiments with, to his anonymity. And people were saying, well, we don't believe he's real, and, I think it's all a fraud, and la 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 la. And I said, look, this guy wants to be private. No one likes to be hounded about things. And this is his choice. We've said we're going to keep his anonymity. We have a right to say anything that we do ourselves. But we have, when someone wants to, for whatever reason, and because there has been a lot of fishy business in this field, to keep their privacy, then we uphold that. And so it was interesting because in this email, he'd underlined every firm defense that I'd made of maintaining his anonymity. And that was in 2016. And it was in 2017 that he decided that he would share the first of the Lion reactors with the MFMP for analysis. And it was clear that he had done so much more, and he had been doing this right from the beginning. He had been studying it right from that initial announcement of Pons and Fleischmann. But as far as we can see, this is the first time he was public about pretty much anything that he had done. And thank God that that knowledge was not lost. Thank Lion for not holding on to that. But what you will see, actually, in the coming week, is that there were things that he did hold on to. And I urged him to be public about them. And it was so frustrating. It was so frustrating. But he wouldn't. And one I've talked about is the drain. Somewhere in his documents, I'm sure that will be documented. Thankfully, he seems to have kept voluminous notes on what he did. There was another aspect, and I spoke to the person going through the notes. I said, look, he told me about this, and he's never made it public because he wanted to get the people at the Cavendish lab interested and the UK government interested. And so we'll show he told me that this happened, and I have the evidence that it happened. The person going through the notes found the logbook entries talking about this happened. We know which reactor it happened with, and so we'll make that public when I can bring that together next week. So it's a shame that he felt he couldn't be public about it during his life, but thankfully, we've been given the opportunity to share that forward. And his wife gave me permission to access his Google account. And it's quite special, really, because, as I told you before, the O-Day, the last of the major O-Day presentations, there's more to share, but not on this particular subject. The last of the O-Day presentations, O-Day evening, was shared on the 3rd of April, the day before he died. And I kind of hoped that because he was the instigator of this entire path of discovery, of learning, of rediscovery, I should say, that he got to see that. Well, I'm very pleased to say that in his email, the very last email that was clicked on and apparently read was O-Day evening. Hajar al-Falasifa. This is the one where I talked about the purpose of the Great Pyramid. Hajar, which means stone, al-Falasifa. That's the Arabic for philosopher's stone. And so it's good that he got to see conclusion. It's interesting because when I say O-Day is finally here, which was a couple of weeks before, a month and a half before, he wrote to me and said, you know, I get a feeling that you're concluding this and that you're going to be moving on to different things, and you've done your 10 years. And, you know, whatever, he wrote to me and said, just whatever it is you do in life, shine your light. I said, no, Lion, I've not finished. I've not finished. I haven't even finished O-Day yet. I said, O-Day is here. It's not finished. And that was the whole series of rolling out morning, not morning, and noon, and so forth. But you know, he must have got some pleasure in seeing that it got to that level. And likewise, what's happened with the trip to see Matsumoto, something utterly beautiful has come out of that. And let me share that with you now. And like I say, I will share on the remoteview.icu blog for this present live stream. I will share a link to a Zoom call, and I encourage you to join me after that. But after I got back, in fact, I think it was like the day or just the day after, I think I got back, or very shortly after I got back from Japan. Sho, fantastic. Thank you, Sho, for everything you've done. My fixer and translator and so forth in Japan. He wrote to me and he said, "Good news. Dr. Nawa, the former president of Hokkaido University, made a phone call to me. He is now retired and gets interested in Brown's gas and Amasa gas. He contacted Mr. Amasa first, and Mr. Amasa introduced him to me, because this Dr. Nawa, the former president of Hokkaido University, had watched the MFMP videos about the experiments that we did in 2019, and following our trip to see Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, he realized that there is a pioneering LENR scientist at Hokkaido University, or was at Hokkaido University. And so he wanted to make a phone call to Dr. Matsumoto and asked Sho for his phone number. So he first asked Dr. Matsumoto, if it was okay for him to pass on to Dr. Nawa his phone number. And they seemed to have a very good conversation. In fact, before I got this email from Sho, I had an extremely excited and energetic email from Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto to say that he had been contacted by Dr. Nawa and had a long and in-depth intellectual conversation. And here it's reported by Sho as they seem to have a good conversation. Dr. Nawa wants to do something for Dr. Matsumoto. And all these things will let Dr. Matsumoto realize what he wanted to achieve, I hope. And so from Dr. Matsumoto's side of things, he said that Dr. Nawa, having seen what we did in Japan in 2019 and finding out from our recent trip to Japan to try and ensure the legacy of Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, he says, this is the former president of Hokkaido University. He wants to spend the rest of his life working on LENR and cold fusion, and he wants to work with Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. How freaking awesome is that? And other people have reached out to me and said, look, I have done a lot, but I realized over the last couple of weeks that I might just die and I'll leave a lot of things and no one will have a clue what they're for or what inspired them. And so probably it's a good idea to start documenting them. And one of those people was even one John Hutchison, who today wrote to me inviting me to join in fact, it was only at 6:35 this evening, to join a timeline that he wants to be building called the Hutchison Lab Investigations. So I think people might have realized that we're in a unique time in history right now. And I can tell you right now, there are two extremely serious and important senior researchers in this field who have currently got cancer. One of them's, their cancer is pretty treatable, and they are in it's in remission a little bit, but you know, it's a long time before they know whether they're in the clear. The other person, sadly, it's a more serious situation. They're a very, very big part of this community. And their prognosis is not anywhere near so good, such that they will not be able to participate further, likely. And in the latter case, I know that that person has already put into motion securing unpublished works and so forth. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here before I switch over to the live stream is, don't let this be another 120 years before someone realizes that someone in this beginning of this century realized what was done at the beginning of the last century, and we have to wait 1,000 years before this delivers on its promise. Each of you can play a role. You can spread the word. You can critique things. You can do what many of you do so brilliantly. Find articles that are genuinely not rubbish and do have a scientific basis and actionable things that can be considered to push this forward. There are many, many ways you can help, and I thank those people. It's going to take a long time to scan the work of Lion and get it all in a format that where it can be disseminated, because there has to be redactions for people's names and addresses that shouldn't be made public. And so I'm thankfully there's we have at least 2 volunteers already that have stepped forward to take chunks of that work to do that once it has been scanned. But I'm going to need to go to the UK and work on that for a week at some point. But I can tell you there are things that we've already found that he said he did, that he hadn't shared, that I was told had happened, but they're going to be made public. And I can also tell you that I believe that I will get permission to share his real name. I appealed to his wife and said, look, this guy really needs credit for who he is. And I will be able to give you some context of his education and so forth. And I think it's quite enlightening. So with that, I'm going to kill this, and I'm going to go and shift to Zoom, and I will share in a few minutes the Zoom call details in remoteview.icu. So thank you very, very much for joining me on this short presentation called Ego Out. I believe Lion enabled one of his greatest dreams of understanding to be potentially, I'm not saying it is, but potentially realized in the Ode series, and the important part concluded in Hajar al-Philosopher, Ode Evening. I think this is a fitting thing here by Peter Gluck, who died on the anniversary, or one of the anniversaries, of the cold fusion announcement. The quantity of information, knowledge and wisdom lost by the death of an individual. Ego out. Don't, if you think you've got something to share, don't lose it. Give it forward. Thank you, and I'll see you in a little while on Zoom.
Free will ultimately does not come in until there's some awareness in you. That's where free will comes from. Until you have some awareness, you are run by the conditioning of your mind, and so you have no choice. The element of choice comes in when you become aware, for example, of the thoughts that go through your head, and you might realize suddenly, and for some people that's the first time they awaken spiritually, when they realize that for years they've had a voice in their head talking to them, which could be a monologue, it could be a dialogue, you could have a conversation with yourself, you can beat yourself up and say, I'm not good enough. The voice in the head, for some people the spiritual awakening comes when they become aware that there's a voice in the head, and there's the awareness. At the moment there's the awareness, you might even be able to choose to let go of a certain thought, a repetitive thought that you don't need anymore, that you don't want anymore, and then you surrender it, or you breathe it out. You don't need it.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because running a business is hard, and waking up every day and getting to work when you're all by yourself is hard. And the thing that saved me, that continues to inspire me, motivate me, give me hope, inspiration, ideas, is looking at the stories of people who've done a lot more than me. And I learn strategies, I get motivation, and it gets me to believe in myself to go off and attack the day. And so I hope this video inspires you to do the same as well. So today, let's get some incredible motivation from the one and only Eckhart Tolle. Enjoy.
Sometimes people are in the grip of strong emotions. But if there's a little bit of awareness there, if, let's say it's anger, anger arises, but in the background you're aware that there's emotion of anger. So there's a small element of choices come in. Do you want to then attack this person? If there's awareness, you can observe the anger, but may no longer need to act it out. I'm not talking about suppressing, but recognizing. The more awareness you have, or presence, the more choice there's in your life. And then it's only then that you actually become truly intelligent, because this awareness is not an IQ thing. I've met highly intelligent people with 1 or 2 or 3 PhDs, academics and others, who are completely unaware, still just completely in their minds, and people in their personal lives, often very dysfunctional personal lives. So it's not to be equated with intelligence, this awareness. To take a responsibility for, what is it that you can take responsibility for primarily? It's taking responsibility for your state of consciousness, which determines what kind of world you create. Because you are humanity. Humanity is an abstract concept, doesn't exist. Humanity is the human being. You are humanity. So for humanity to take responsibility, you need to take primarily responsibility for your state of consciousness, because only a diseased or dysfunctional state of consciousness produces a diseased and dysfunctional world out there. By world, I mean the human-made world that has been imposed on what's already there, the planet, which is potentially, of course, a paradise. The planet, pristine, unbelievable jewel, a being of great intelligence. We are not separate from it, but the being is going through a transitional process. And every transitional process is critical. It may or may not work, in which case the being will go some other way. But your state of consciousness determines what kind of world you create, what kind of action you take, and what consequences your actions have. So here, this is why my main work is to address the cause of dysfunction, which lies in the human mind. The dysfunction of the human mind, or as it is sometimes called in Zen, the sickness of the human mind. So, as I see it, and I don't think anybody who reads history can doubt it, there is a deep-seated dysfunction in humans, has been there for thousands of years. And if there's no shift in that, then the dysfunction will destroy us. It probably won't destroy the planet, because the planet has enormous resources, but it'll take a while, would take a while for the planet to recover. All you have to do then is primarily take responsibility for your state of consciousness now. Now. And this is what the entire teaching really is about. What is my state of consciousness at this moment? Am I generating disturbance? Am I generating negativity? Am I generating conflict and suffering for myself and others? Am I generating inner pollution? Am I polluting the beautiful being that I am with continuous